They laughed at the old rancher's wall until the smoke reached Cottonwood Ridge. The first stone Elias Boone lifted after his wife died was no bigger than a loaf of bread, but it felt heavier than grief. He found it in the dry creek bed below his ranch, half buried in pale sand, warm from the June sun. For a long while he only stood over it, hat low over his eyes, his old hands hanging at his sides. The wind moved through the bunch grass behind him, soft and restless, and somewhere near the barn his horse gave a tired snort as if telling him to get on with living. Elias did not answer the horse. He bent slowly, the way a man bends when his bones have begun keeping records of every winter he has survived, and he took hold of that stone. His fingers trembled, not because he was weak, though he was weaker than he liked to admit. They trembled because for 7 months his hands had not known what to do with themselves. Before Mary Boone passed, his hands had known everything. They had known how to fix a loose hinge before she asked, how to pour coffee in her blue cup without spilling a drop, how to pull a chair close to the stove when her knees ached, how to touch the back of her shoulder in passing, just enough to say what words never could. After she was gone, his hands became strangers. So he carried the stone up the slope. By sunset, he had placed it along the north edge of his land where the timber began. A single stone, sitting alone in the dust beneath the long shadow of Cottonwood Ridge. The next morning, he brought another. By the end of the week, he had a crooked little row of rocks stretching from a cedar stump to a fence post. By the end of the month, the men in town had started laughing. "You building yourself a grave, Elias?" Calder Pike called one morning from the wagon road, his hat pushed back and a grin spread across his sunburned face. Elias was kneeling in the dirt with both sleeves rolled up, pressing a flat gray stone into place. His shirt was damp with sweat. Dust clung to the cracks in his hands. "No," Elias said without looking up. "I'm building something that may keep one from being dug." Calder laughed at that, though not cruelly at first. Most men in Mercy Flats laughed the way they spat tobacco, out of habit and for something to do. But Calder had never known when to leave a quiet man alone. "That old pine country has stood there 100 years, he said. "A few stones won't scare it if it decides to burn." Elias pressed his palm against the stone until it settled steady. "Fire ain't scared of stone," he said, "but it has to reckon with it." Calder shook his head. "Mary would have told you to rest." That made Elias still. The name hung between them like a church bell after its final strike. For the first time that morning, Elias looked up. His eyes were pale from age and weather, but there was something sharp left inside them, something that had not softened even under sorrow. "Mary would have brought me water," he said. Calder's grin faded. He tipped his hat once awkwardly, then rode on without another word. When his wagon wheels disappeared beyond the rise, Elias looked toward the small white house sitting below the ridge. The porch was empty now. No quilt hanging over the rail. No woman shelling peas in a wooden bowl. No voice calling him inside before the biscuits burned. Only the wind moved there. Only memory. The Boone place sat in a narrow valley 2 days' ride from Abilene, where the grass rolled gold in summer and the dark timber climbed the eastern hills like a waiting army. It had been good land once, kinder than most. There was a creek when the Lord allowed it. There was room for cattle, room for corn, room for a man and woman to believe their labor might outlast them. But after 3 dry seasons, the creek had thinned to a whisper. The leaves in the high pines turned dull at the tips. Even the birds seemed to fly lower, as if the sky itself had grown too hot to trust. Elias noticed things other men missed. He noticed how the rabbits had stopped nesting near the tree line. He noticed the smell of pitch in the sun, thick and bitter. He noticed how the evening wind came down from the ridge warmer than it should have, carrying dust instead of cool. Most folks in Mercy Flats said he was seeing ghosts because he had lost Mary. Maybe he was. But ghosts did not make pine needles dry enough to crack under a boot. Every dawn, Elias took his mule down to the creek bed and loaded stones into a small drag sled he had built from broken fence boards. He worked before the heat came hard. He worked when his back burned. He worked when his knees shook. Sometimes he stopped and leaned on the wall, breathing through pain while sweat dripped from the brim of his hat. Then he worked again. No one understood what he was making, and he did not waste breath trying to make them. It was not a wall like the ones around rich men's gardens. It was not smooth or pretty. It rose uneven from the earth, wide at the bottom, rough as old knuckles, built along the place where pasture met timber. He packed dirt behind it, cleared brush in front of it, and cut low limbs from the nearest trees until the north boundary looked bare and wounded. A preacher's wife passing by one afternoon crossed herself and whispered, "Poor Mr. Boone has gone strange." At the general store, men shook their heads over coffee. His own son, Nathan, heard of it before he came home. Nathan Boone arrived in Mercy Flats near the end of August with a city coat folded over his arm and worry already written across his face. He had been living in Wichita for 6 years, working in a bank, speaking in careful sentences, wearing collars too stiff for a man raised in dust. Elias watched him step down from the stage with his wife, Clara, and their little girl, Annie. Annie was 9 years old and had Mary's dark eyes. That was the first hurt. She ran to Elias without shyness and wrapped both arms around his waist. He stood frozen for one breath, then set his hand gently on her hair. "You got tall," he said. "You got old," she answered. For the first time in months, Elias almost smiled. Nathan did not smile. His eyes had already moved past the house, past the barn, toward the line of stones climbing along the north field. That evening after supper, he walked out there with his father. The sky was red behind the ridge. Cicadas screamed in the grass. A lantern swung from Elias' hand, throwing gold light over the stones. Nathan stared at the wall for a long time. "Pa," he said softly, "what have you done?" Elias set the lantern on a flat rock. Started. "Started what?" "A walt." "I can see that." "Then why ask?" Nathan rubbed his forehead, just as he had done as a boy when numbers confused him. "You're 70 years old." 71 come November. "That makes this worse." Elias said nothing. Nathan stepped closer to the stones and touched one with his polished boot, almost like he expected it to fall apart. "Folks are saying you work out here every day, in this heat, alone." "I am alone." The words came out plain, but they landed hard. Nathan's face changed. For a moment he looked less like a banker and more like the boy who once cried behind the barn after his mother killed a chicken for stew. "You don't have to be," Nathan said. Elias looked toward the house, where Clara's shadow moved behind the curtains and Annie's small laugh floated out through the open window. Then he looked up at the timber. Beyond the ridge, very far off, thunder rolled, though there was not a cloud in the sky. Elias picked up the lantern. "No," he said quietly, "but when the fire comes, wanting company won't stop it." Nathan turned toward him, pale in the lantern glow. "What fire?" Before Elias could answer, a thin breath of wind slipped down from Cottonwood Ridge, carrying with it the faintest smell of smoke. Nathan smelled it too, though he tried not to show it. He turned his face toward the ridge and narrowed his eyes. In the last light of evening, the pines stood black and still, their tops sharp against the red sky. Nothing moved up there. No glow, no falling ash, no sign of danger a reasonable man could point to. Only that thin, bitter scent in the wind. "It could be someone burning brush," Nathan said. "No one with sense burns brush in August," Elias answered. "You don't know that." "I know this valley." Nathan looked back at him, and the old pain rose between them. It had been there since Mary's funeral, maybe even before. Nathan had left the ranch young, hungry for clean cuffs and a life where weather did not decide whether a family ate well or went without. Elias had not stopped him, but he had never quite forgiven him either. And Nathan, for his part, had carried away the belief that his father loved the land more than his own blood. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Annie came running from the house, with her braid bouncing against her back. "Grandpa," she called, "Mama says there's pie." Elias turned, and the hard lines around his mouth softened. "Then your mama has more mercy than most judges." Annie slowed when she reached the wall. Her eyes widened as she took it in. Children saw things without first deciding what they were supposed to think. She walked along the stones, careful but curious, her small fingers brushing the rough edges. "Did you build all this?" she asked. Not all yet. But you will. Elias glanced at Nathan before answering. I mean to. Annie climbed onto a low place where the stones were wide and steady. Nathan reached for her arm at once. Get down, Annie. She froze, startled. It's all right, Elias said. That part is set firm. Nathan's jaw tightened. I said get down. Annie obeyed, though disappointment crossed her face. She moved beside Elias instead and took his big scarred hand in both of hers. Her fingers were soft, nothing like Mary's had been near the end when sickness turned every touch light as paper. Does the wall keep wolves out? She asked. Wolves can climb. Then what is it for? Nathan let out a tired breath. Your grandfather believes it will stop fire. Annie looked at the stones again. Can fire climb? Elias knelt slowly so his eyes were level with hers. His knee cracked as he lowered himself. Fire climbs better than any wolf. It runs through grass, jumps from tree to tree, crawls under doors if a man lets it. But stone does not feed it. Bare dirt does not feed it. A wall gives fire a hard place to cross. Annie thought on that with grave attention. So it makes the fire tired. A faint smile touched Elias' mouth. Something like that. Nathan looked away and Elias saw the old worry in him turn sharp. It was not anger alone. That much Elias understood. His son was afraid of finding his father thinner than last year, afraid of the lonely house, afraid of the wall because it looked less like protection and more like the work of a man trying to wrestle death with his bare hands. After pie, Nathan followed him into the barn. The evening had cooled some, but the air inside still held the warm smell of hay, leather, and old wood. Elias hung the lantern from a peg. His bay horse, Juniper, shifted in her stall and pressed her nose over the rail, searching his shirt pocket for sugar. You keep spoiling that mare, Nathan said. She's earned it. Elias gave Juniper a lump from his pocket. The horse took it gently from his palm. Nathan stood with both hands at his belt, staring at the wall tools stacked near the door. A shovel, a pry bar, a sledge, coils of rope, gloves gone stiff from sweat and dirt. This is not healthy, Nathan said. Elias closed the stall latch. Neither is sitting in a chair waiting for the undertaker. Don't talk that way. Why not men die, women too, Mary did. Nathan flinched as if the name had struck him. Elias regretted it at once, but pride sealed his mouth. Nathan stepped closer, voice low. Ma spent her last months asking when you and I would stop fighting. Do you know that? The lantern flame bent in a draft. Elias looked down at his hands. The knuckles were swollen, the nails dark with earth. She worried too much. She worried because you both loved each other, and neither one of you knew how to say it plain. Elias swallowed, but the tightness in his throat would not move. Outside, the wind brushed against the barn doors. Somewhere up on the ridge, a branch cracked. Nathan lowered his voice. Come back with us for a while, just through the worst of the heat. Clara wants you to. Annie would be happy. You can rest, see a doctor, let men younger than you finish whatever must be done here. Elias shook his head. You have money enough to hire help. I don't need hired hands stacking stones. They don't understand. They're stones, Pa. Elias turned then, and the hurt in his eyes made Nathan go silent. No, Elias said. They are mornings I got through when the bed was too empty. They are meals I remembered to eat because I had work after. They are the place I put my grief so it would not rot inside me. They are every day I chose not to follow your mother into the ground. Nathan's face changed. For once, he had no ready answer. Elias took a breath and looked toward the open barn door. The last red of sunset had faded. The ridge was dark now, but the smell of smoke had grown stronger. I am not asking you to understand, he said. I am asking you not to stand in my way. Nathan turned slowly toward the hills. This time he did not call the smoke someone's brush pile. He walked out of the barn and into the yard. Elias followed. Clara had come onto the porch, one hand resting against the post, her face pale in the lantern glow from the window behind her. Annie stood beside her, holding a slice of pie she had forgotten to eat. From beyond Cottonwood Ridge, far off and faint, came the sound of a bell. Not a church bell. The town warning bell. Nathan looked back at his father, and for the first time since coming home, he did not look ashamed of the wall. He looked afraid it might not be enough. The town bell rang 3 times, stopped, then rang again. That was how Mercy Flats warned of fire. Not a barn blaze, not a kitchen stove gone wild. A real fire. The kind that moved with the wind and ate what men loved before they had time to pray over it. Clara stepped off the porch with one hand pressed to her chest. Nathan. He did not answer right away. He was staring toward town, where a faint orange smear trembled low behind the cottonwoods. Elias knew that glow. He had seen it once as a boy in Kansas, when a prairie fire ran so fast men had turned horses loose and fled on foot. He had seen it again 15 years earlier when lightning struck the east timber and burned nearly 4,000 acres before rain came. That second fire had never reached the Boone place, but he remembered Mary standing beside him in the yard, holding a wet flour sack in one hand, her face calm and white. The memory came so sharp, he had to grip the porch rail. Inside, Nathan said to Clara, pack what you can. Clara looked from him to Elias. Are we leaving? Annie is, Nathan said. Annie's eyes widened. I don't want to leave Grandpa. Elias walked to her and bent down, though his back protested. Little dove, your job is to listen to your father. But what about you? I have my own listening to do. She looked toward the ridge, then at the stone wall. In the orange light, her face seemed older than 9. Will the wall make the fire tired? She asked. Elias placed his hand on her shoulder. It will try. Nathan came forward. Pa, there is no time for riddles. If the bell is ringing, we need to get everyone to town or farther west. Elias shook his head. Town sits in a basin. If the wind turns, smoke will settle there like water in a bowl. Then we go west. You take them west. Nathan's mouth tightened. I'm not leaving you here. You have a wife and daughter. And I have a father. The words struck Elias harder than he expected. For years, Nathan had spoken to him like a responsibility, an old debt, a hard thing that had to be managed from far away. But that night, under a smoke-colored sky, he sounded like a son again. For one breath, Elias wanted to say yes. He wanted to climb into the wagon, sit beside Annie, and let the ranch disappear behind him. He wanted to be an old man with sense. He wanted Mary's voice to rise from memory and tell him he had done enough. But then the wind came from the ridge again, carrying smoke and dry needles and a heat that did not belong to night. Elias looked past Nathan to the wall. It was not finished. The west stretch still had gaps where flame could run through grass and brush. He had meant to close them before autumn. He had told himself there was time. There was never as much time as a man thought. I need 2 hours, Elias said. Nathan stared. For what? To clear the west side and close the low gap by Harper's Wash. The fire could be here before then. Then I need 1 hour. You're talking madness. No, Elias said, his voice low. I'm talking about the only chance this place has. Clara came down the steps carrying a small carpet bag. She had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, though the night was warm. Her eyes were frightened but steady. Nathan, let him show you what needs doing. Nathan looked at her as if betrayed. She stepped closer. If you drag him away, he will spend the rest of his days looking back. You know he will. Annie slipped her hand into Clara's. Elias saw it then, the quiet courage in his daughter-in-law. He had often thought Clara too soft for ranch life, too careful with her gloves, too polite when cattle got loose or storms tore shingles from the roof. But she was not soft that night. She was holding fear in both hands and not letting it spill. Nathan looked at the wall again. What do you need? He asked. Elias did not waste time being surprised. Harness Juniper to the drag sled. Bring every empty grain sack from the barn. Clara, soak blankets and put them over the wagon bed. Keep Annie's face covered if smoke thickens. Annie, fetch the blue coffee tin from the kitchen shelf. Annie blinked, the one with buttons. That one. What for? Mary kept fence wire in the bottom. I need it. The girl ran. For the next hour, the Boone place woke like a camp before battle. But there were no guns, no shouting men, no glory. There was only work. Nathan stripped off his city coat and rolled up his sleeves. Clara filled buckets at the pump until her skirt hem turned dark with splashed water. Elias hitched Juniper with hands that remembered faster than they moved. They worked under a sky growing redder by the minute. At the West Gap, Elias showed Nathan how to brace flat stones against larger ones, how to pack earth into cracks, how to lay green-cut limbs away from the wall and not against it. Nathan listened, breathing hard, sweat drawing clean lines through the dust on his face. "This is why you cut the brush back," Nathan said. "Yes." "And why you dug that bare strip?" "Yes." Nathan lifted a stone and staggered under its weight. Elias reached to help, but Nathan shook him off. "I have it." For a moment, the old man saw the boy he had raised, stubborn as a mule, proud as thunder, desperate to prove his hands could still belong to the land that made him. They set the stone together anyway. By midnight, ash began to fall. Tiny white flakes drifted from the dark like winter had come burning instead of cold. One landed on Elias' sleeve and broke apart when he touched it. Annie stood beside the wagon, watching. Her face was covered with a damp cloth Clara had tied behind her head. In her hand, she held Mary's blue coffee tin. Elias walked to her, opened it, and found the wire just where Mary had left it years ago. Under it lay something he had forgotten. A folded note. The paper was yellow at the edges, soft from time. Elias knew Mary's handwriting before he even opened it, and his breath caught in his chest. He should have put it away. There was no time for old words. But grief does not ask permission. He unfolded the note with shaking fingers. "Elias, if the ridge ever burns again, do not try to save the house alone." He stared at the line until the letters blurred. Nathan came up behind him, "Pa." Elias folded the note quickly, but not before Nathan saw his mother's name at the bottom. For anyone listening to this story and wondering whether stubborn love can be both foolish and brave, stay with the Boone family a little longer, because the truth in Mary's note had only begun to rise with the smoke. Elias put the note in his shirt pocket. Then from the ridge above them, a pine tree burst into flame. The burning pine lit the ridge like a torch held up by an unseen hand. For one terrible second, no one moved. The tree crackled high above them, sparks twisting into the sky. The sound was not loud yet, but it carried a warning that made Elias' blood turn cold. It was the first voice of something much larger coming behind it. Clara pulled Annie close against her skirt. Nathan stepped forward, staring up at the ridge. "How far?" "Too close," Elias said. Another tree caught, then another. A line of orange began to crawl through the timber, not racing yet, but gathering itself. Elias had seen cattle do that before a stampede, stillness first, then one wild shove from behind, then nothing could hold them. "Get them out," Elias told Nathan. Nathan turned fast. "No, we still have time." "We had time, now we have moments." "Then come with us." Elias looked toward the house. The windows glowed soft from the lamps Clara had left burning. Mary had chosen those curtains with little blue flowers on them. Mary had planted the lilac bush by the steps. Mary had stood in that kitchen the first day they owned the place and said, "It is small, Elias, but it knows how to hold love." The house was not just boards, but neither was Annie. Neither was Clara. Neither was Nathan, though pride had kept Elias from showing how much that mattered. He grabbed his son by both shoulders. Nathan was taller now, broader through the chest, but in that moment Elias still felt the boy inside the man. "Listen to me," Elias said. "You take your family west along the creek road. Do not go through town unless the sheriff stops you. Keep the blankets wet. If smoke drops low, get down in the wagon and breathe through cloth. Do not turn back for me." Nathan's eyes shone in the firelight. "You think I can drive away and leave you standing here?" "I think you can do what a father must." Nathan looked as if those words had cut him. Behind them, Juniper tossed her head and pulled at the wagon traces, sensing the danger. Annie began to cry, though she made little sound. Clara lifted the child into the wagon bed and tucked the soaked blankets around her. Elias walked to Annie and handed her Mary's blue coffee tin. Keep that safe. Her small hands closed around it. Grandpa, please come. His throat tightened. I will do my best. That is not the same. No, he said softly, it is not. She reached for him and he let her hold his neck for one brief moment. Her cheek was hot against his. She smelled of smoke, sugar, and tears. When he pulled away, she left a damp mark on his collar. Nathan climbed onto the wagon seat, then stopped. He looked back at the wall, the half-closed gap, the bare strip of earth, the tools lying where they had dropped them. He looked at his father. Then he climbed down again. Clara stared at him. Nathan. He unhitched Juniper from the wagon and led her to Elias. What are you doing? Elias demanded. Taking the mule for the wagon. Juniper knows the ridge and the lower draw. You may need her. You have lost your sense. Maybe it runs in the family. Nathan moved quickly, too quickly for argument. He hitched the mule to the wagon while Clara watched in silence. Her face showed fear, but also something like understanding. Marriage had taught her when a man had already made up his mind, and when words would only waste breath. When Nathan returned to Elias, he pressed something into his father's hand. A small brass watch. Elias knew it at once. It had belonged to Mary's father, then to Mary, then to Nathan when he left for Wichita. Elias had thought his son sold it years ago. Come by dawn, Nathan said. If you are not at the West Crossing by dawn, I am coming back. No, you are not. Nathan leaned close, then be there. For once, Elias had no answer. The wagon rolled out under a sky full of ash. Clara kept one arm around Annie and one hand over her own mouth with a wet cloth. Annie looked back until the smoke swallowed her face. Elias stood in the yard, holding the brass watch, listening to the wheels fade down the creek road. When the last sound of them was gone, the ranch felt larger than it ever had. Emptier too. Elias put the watch in his pocket beside Mary's note and turned to the wall. The fire had begun moving faster. It came down through the pines in uneven bursts. One tree would flare, then another 20 yards away. Sparks leapt ahead and vanished into dry grass. The wind pushed smoke low across the pasture, and Elias tied a wet bandana over his nose before leading Juniper to the west gap. There was still a narrow opening near Harper's Wash, no wider than a wagon gate. He had meant to finish it after breakfast that morning. Now it looked big enough for the whole world to burn through. He loaded stones onto the drag sled, tied the rope to Juniper, and clicked his tongue. Come on, girl. The horse leaned into the work. Stone by stone, he closed the gap. His hands worked without thought. Pick, set, brace, pack dirt, wedge smaller stones into cracks. Smoke stung his eyes until tears ran down his cheeks. Heat pressed against his back like an open oven door. Twice he stumbled. Once he dropped a stone on his boot so hard pain shot up his leg and made him gasp. Still he worked. By the time the first embers landed in the pasture, the gap was almost shut. Almost. A burning branch fell from the ridge and struck the dry grass beyond the wall. Flame licked up at once, bright and eager. Elias grabbed the shovel and beat it down before it could spread, but another ember fell behind him, closer to the barn. Then another. The wall was slowing the fire, but the sky was carrying pieces of it over like thieves in the dark. Elias looked at the house, the barn, the hay stacked inside, and the long strip of grass between them. He understood then what Mary's note had meant. Do not try to save the house alone. But there was no one left. He lifted the shovel and started toward the barn just as a horse came thundering through the smoke from the creek road. For one wild heartbeat, Elias thought Nathan had broken his promise. Then the rider burst into the yard, coughing hard, hat gone, face blackened with soot. It was Calder Pike, and he was leading 3 frightened children behind him. Calder Pike nearly fell from the saddle when he reached the yard. His horse stumbled, foam white along its bit, eyes rolling wide from smoke and fear. Behind him, 3 children clung to one another on a second horse, the oldest no more than 13, the youngest hardly 5. Their faces were streaked with ash and tears. One little boy held a rag doll tight against his chest like it was the last piece of home left in the world. Elias stared at them, stunned. Calder, he rasped through the wet bandana. What in God's name? Calder slid down and grabbed the reins of the children's horse. He coughed so hard he bent at the waist. When he lifted his head, the laughing man from the wagon road was gone. In his place stood a frightened neighbor with shaking hands and eyes full of things no man wanted to see. Bennett Place caught first, Calder said. Their folks went to town yesterday for supplies. Kids were with their aunt. She got them out, then the smoke split us. I found them near the wash. Elias looked toward the ridge. The fire was brighter now, moving in waves behind the wall. The stones glowed red in places, not burning but reflecting the hunger beyond them. Where is their aunt? Calder swallowed. Headed west, I pray. Horse threw me before I could find her. These three were hiding under the creek bank. The oldest child, a girl with a torn sleeve and soot on her cheek, stepped down from the horse. She tried to stand straight, tried to be brave for the two smaller ones, but her knees shook. Mister, she said, looking at Elias, is this place safe? Elias wanted to lie. He wanted to say yes with a strong voice, the way men said things when children needed shelter. But the wind threw sparks over the yard, and a small flame came alive in the grass near the chicken coop. No place is safe tonight, he said, but this place has work around it. The girl looked toward the wall, and something like hope moved across her face. Calder followed her gaze. His mouth trembled once. I laughed at that wall, he said. Not the time, Elias answered. It is the time, Calder said, voice breaking. I laughed while you were saving us. Elias saw the shame in him, heavy and plain. He had no room in his heart for anger then, not with children coughing in his yard and fire pressing down from the hills. Then stop wasting breath on guilt, Elias said. Use your hands. The words seemed to steady Calder. He wiped his face with his sleeve and nodded. Elias pointed to the house. Get those children into the root cellar, wet sacks over the door. Clara left water buckets by the pump. Move fast, but don't scare them worse. The little boy with the rag doll began to cry when Calder reached for him. The older girl stepped between them. I can take him. What's your name? Elias asked. Rose Bennett. Rose, you get your brothers down those steps and keep them low. If smoke comes under the door, you breathe through wet cloth. You hear me? She nodded, eyes wide. What are their names? Luke and Matthew. Elias knelt despite the pain in his leg and looked at the youngest, Matthew. The boy's lower lip shook. Elias took a small peppermint from his shirt pocket, one he kept for Annie, and put it in the child's hand. That there is a brave man's sweet, he said. You hold it until you know you've earned it. Matthew closed his fist around it and stopped crying, though tears still clung to his lashes. After the children were led away, Elias and Calder turned toward the barn. The hay inside was the worst danger now. If one ember caught it, the flames would rise high enough to throw fire across the yard and take the house from above, wall or no wall. Elias moved as fast as his old body allowed, dragging wet blankets from the pump and slapping them over the lower barn doors. Calder climbed to the roof with a bucket and shovel. Elias nearly shouted at him to get down, then saw the way Calder moved. Quick, sure, scared, but useful. A man could be foolish for years and still become brave in one good hour. Together they fought the small fires that landed ahead of the main blaze. They stamped sparks from the grass. They soaked the porch. They cleared loose straw from the barn mouth. Juniper pulled another load of stones to the last weak place near Harper's Wash, and Calder helped Elias set them under a sky that seemed ready to fall. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because sometimes the thing people mock becomes the only shelter they have left. By 2:30, the main fire reached the north wall. It did not arrive like a line of flame. It arrived like a living storm. The wind roared down from the ridge, full of heat and ash. Burning needles spun through the air. The pines beyond the stones flashed orange and gold, bending in the fire's own breath. Elias stood with Calder behind the wall, both men holding shovels, both too small against what was coming. For a moment, Calder grabbed Elias' arm. It can't hold, he said. Elias looked at the stones, each one found, lifted, hauled, cursed over, and set by hand. He remembered mornings when loneliness had almost beaten him. He remembered Mary's empty chair. He remembered Annie asking if fire could climb. It does not have to hold forever, he said. It only has to give us time. The flames struck the cleared strip first. There was nothing easy there for them to eat, only bare dirt, scattered rock, and short grass cut close. The fire bent and searched, hungry for a path. Then it slammed against the wall. Heat washed over Elia's face so hard he staggered back. Calder cried out and lifted an arm to shield his eyes. Sparks leapt high, crossing in bright swarms, but the heavy flames broke, split, and curled along the stone line instead of rushing straight into the pasture. The wall was working. Not perfectly, not like a miracle. Like labor. Like stubbornness. Like love made out of rock. Elias laughed once, a rough sound swallowed by smoke, then coughed until his chest hurt. Calder stared at the stones as if seeing a church rise from the dirt. From behind them came a scream. Elias turned. Smoke was pushing from the root cellar door under the house, and Rose Bennett was pounding from the inside. Elias ran before he remembered he was old. His bad leg dragged in the dirt and smoke tore at his throat, but he crossed the yard with Calder close behind. The roar from the wall rolled at their backs, deep and hungry, while Rose's fist struck the cellar door from beneath like a frightened drum. "Hold on," Elias shouted. He grabbed the iron handle and pulled. The door lifted only a hand's width before it jammed. Calder threw his shoulder beside him. Together they pulled again. The wood groaned, but something beneath it held tight. Smoke seeped through the gap, gray and bitter, making Elias' eyes water. "Rose," he called, "get the boys low." Her voice came muffled and thin. "We are low," Matthew's coughing. Elias dropped to one knee and shoved his hand through the gap. His fingers brushed broken wood, then a twist of cloth. A wet grain sack had slipped and wedged under the hinge brace. It had swollen from water and trapped the door like a cork in a bottle. He cursed under his breath, not loud enough for the children to hear. Calder looked toward the barn, a crowbar. No time. The heat behind them grew stronger. Embers were landing on the porch roof now, little orange eyes blinking to life and going dark where the wet wood held. But the wall could not stop smoke. It came over and around, filling every hollow place. Elias pulled his knife from his belt. His hands shook so badly, he nearly dropped it. For a terrible moment, he saw Mary's hands instead. Mary folding sheets, Mary cutting pie dough, Mary pressing a cool cloth to his forehead when fever had taken him one winter. Then he saw her note in his pocket, the words burning hotter than the fire. "Do not try to save the house alone." He pushed the knife through the gap and sawed blindly at the sack. The blade caught, slipped, caught again. Inside, one of the boys began to cry. Rose spoke to him, trying to sound calm. "Look at me, Matthew, look at me. Don't breathe big, just small like this." Brave girl, Elias thought. The sack tore. "Pull," he shouted. Calder and Elias heaved together. The cellar door flew up so fast Calder stumbled backward. Smoke rolled out in a low cloud. Rose came first, half carrying Matthew with Luke pressed tight against her side. Their faces were wet from tears and cloth water, their eyes red, but they were alive. Elias reached for Matthew. The boy clung to Rose at first. Then he saw Elias and held up one small fist. In it, the peppermint was still wrapped and untouched. "I didn't earn it yet," he whispered. Elias took him gently. "You just did." Calder swept Luke into his arms and Rose staggered up the steps. For a second she swayed like she might fall. Elias caught her elbow. "You kept them breathing," he said. She looked at him through smoke and fear. "I was scared." Bravery usually is. They moved the children to the far side of the house, where the air was clearer near the pump. Elias soaked cloths again and tied them over their noses. Calder poured water across the porch boards, then froze. The barn roof had caught. Only a small place, no wider than a hat, but flame was licking along the edge of a loose shingle. The hayloft below it held enough dry grass to burn the whole yard white. Calder stared up. "I'll go." "No," Elias said. "You stay with the children. You can barely walk. I can climb my own barn." "That ain't sense." Elias looked at him sharply. "Neither was riding through smoke with 3 children, but you did it." Calder's face tightened. For once he did not argue with pride. He looked at Rose, Luke, and Matthew huddled by the pump, then nodded. Elias grabbed a bucket and climbed the ladder fixed to the barn wall. Every rung felt farther than the last. His arms burned. His chest tightened. Twice he had to stop and press his forehead to the wood while sparks sailed past him into the night. Below, Juniper screamed and pulled against her lead. Calder hurried to calm her, speaking low into the mare's ear. When Elias reached the roof, the world opened around him in fire. The stone wall curved along the pasture like a dark spine glowing red at the edges. Beyond it, the timber burned in broken waves, but the worst of the flame was being forced sideways, away from the heart of the ranch. The cleared earth in front of the stones smoked and flashed, but did not feed the blaze the way tall grass would have. For the first time that night, Elias understood fully. The wall was not saving the ranch by standing alone. It was saving the ranch by changing the fire's choices. He crawled toward the burning shingle and threw water over it. Steam burst up, scalding hot but brief. He beat the blackened edge with the wet sack until the flame died. Then another ember landed near the ridge cap. He struck that one too. Below him, Rose shouted, "Mr. Boone." Elias turned. A shape was moving along the creek road through the smoke. For one foolish second, hope rose in him like dawn. Nathan had come back. But the rider stumbled into the yard on foot, leading a limping horse with no saddle. It was Sheriff Wade Harlan, his coat burned at one sleeve, his face gray with ash. He looked up at Elias on the barn roof and shouted, "Boone, if you have folks here, you best gather them now. The wind has turned." Elias gripped the roof edge. From the south, where Nathan had taken Clara and Annie, a new glow was rising. The south should have been dark. The creek road bent that way through low grass, past a line of cottonwoods, then out toward the open country where Nathan had taken Clara and Annie. Elias had watched the wagon disappear there. He had believed or tried to believe that west meant safety. Now the southern sky pulsed orange. For a moment, Elias could not move. The bucket slipped from his hand and rolled down the barn roof, clattering against shingles before falling into the dirt below. Sheriff Harlan looked up at him, waiting for orders no man had the right to ask from another. Calder stood near the pump with the Bennett children pressed close behind him. Even Juniper had gone still, ears sharp, eyes fixed on the new glow. "The wind turned," Elias shouted. Harlan nodded, coughing into his sleeve. "Came hard out of the north, pushed the fire across Harper's Wash. It is running along the creek now." Elias' chest tightened. "The creek road." The sheriff did not answer fast enough. Elias began climbing down. His boot missed the third rung, and he nearly fell. Calder caught him at the bottom with both arms. "Easy," Calder said. "You'll break your neck." "My family is on that road." "I heard him." "Then let go." Calder released him, but his face twisted with worry. "You can't ride into that." Elias turned on him, and for one fierce second he looked younger than any man there. "My granddaughter is out there." The words ended the argument. Sheriff Harlan stepped forward. "I passed a wagon near the fork before the smoke dropped. Could not tell whose horse team was fighting the reins. A woman was calling for help." Elias felt the ground tilt under him. "Clara, Annie, Nathan." He went at Juniper and pulled the lead free from the post. The mare was trembling, but she did not shy from him. He pressed his forehead briefly to hers. "You and me, girl," he whispered. "One more time." Calder grabbed a saddle from the barn rail. "I'm coming." "You have children to guard." "The sheriff can guard them." Harlan straightened despite his burned sleeve. "I can, but I need to get these young ones west when the smoke opens." Rose Bennett stepped forward. Her small face looked pale under soot, but her voice did not shake. "I can help watch my brothers." "No," Elias said at once. Rose lifted her chin. "I already did." That stopped him. She was right, and the truth of it hurt. Children grew older in one night when fire came near. Calder tightened the cinch on Juniper, then looked at Elias. "You know the land, I know the wash. If that wagon went off the creek road, you need another pair of hands." Elias hated that he was right. He mounted slowly, pain flashing up through his hip. Calder swung onto the sheriff's limping horse after checking the animal's leg. It could walk, maybe trot, nothing more. Harlan handed Calder a wet cloth and gave Elias a hard look. If the smoke turns black, get low and follow the fence line back. Do not try to outrun flame uphill. Elias nodded once. Then he and Calder rode south. The world beyond the yard had changed into something strange and half-blind. Smoke moved in sheets, hiding the land Elias had known for more than 40 years. The pasture fence appeared and vanished. Sparks drifted like angry fireflies. The stone wall ran beside them for a while, glowing in places, still standing, still forcing the worst of the burn away from the house. Elias did not let himself look back. They reached Harper's Wash and followed it down, where the smoke thinned near the damp sand. Calder rode close, one hand over his mouth. His horse limped but kept moving. Somewhere ahead, wood cracked with a sound like a rifle shot. A burned branch fell across the wash, sending sparks into the dry weeds. Calder kicked free and helped Elias drag it aside. "Your boy," he said between coughs. "He knows this road." "He knew it once." "That may be enough." Elias hoped so. Nathan had ridden these draws as a child. He had fished in that creek, hidden from chores under those cottonwoods, raced bareback across the lower pasture before he ever learned to sign bank papers or wear stiff collars. Land remembered a boy even when the man forgot it. They rode on. Then Juniper stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Her ears pointed toward the left bank of the wash. Elias listened past the roar of fire and the pounding in his own chest. At first he heard nothing. Then a faint cry came through the smoke. "Pa." Nathan's voice. Elias jerked the reins and pushed Juniper up the bank. The mare scrambled, hooves sliding in loose dirt, then broke onto the road. The wagon lay tilted in the ditch. One back wheel had cracked against a stone. The mule was down but alive, tangled in harness, kicking weakly. Clara stood beside the wagon, pulling at the wet blankets with one hand while coughing into the other. Nathan was pinned between the wagon box and a fallen cottonwood limb, his face tight with pain. Annie was not in sight. Elias slid from the saddle, so hard his knees nearly failed. "Nathan!" His son turned his head. Relief and shame crossed his face together. "Annie ran when the mule went down. She thought she saw you by the fence." Elias stared at him. "What?" "She had the blue tin," Clara cried. "She heard a horse and ran toward the old line shack. I called, but the smoke took her." The old line shack sat beyond the bend, near the very place where the fire was now crawling along the creek grass. Elias looked through the smoke. A small shape appeared for just a heartbeat beside the broken fence, clutching something blue against her chest. Then the smoke closed around her. Elias moved toward the smoke before anyone could stop him. Nathan shouted his name, but the sound broke apart in the wind. Clara cried for Annie again, her voice raw and full of terror. Calder slid down from the sheriff's horse and ran to the wagon, trying to lift the fallen limb from Nathan's pinned leg, but Elias barely saw any of it. All he saw was the place where Annie had vanished. The old line shack sat beyond a bend in the creek road, half hidden by cottonwoods and tall grass. Elias had built it 30 years before, back when cattle still grazed the far section and storms could trap a man away from the house. It was nothing much. 4 walls, a slanted roof, 1 cot, and a rusted stove. But it stood near a patch of bare rock where grass struggled to grow. If Annie reached that rock, she had a chance. If she ran into the grass, she did not. Elias pulled the wet bandana higher over his mouth and pushed forward. Smoke struck his eyes and turned the world to shadows. He held one hand out, feeling for fence posts, broken rails, anything that told him where he was. His boots slipped in ash. His lungs fought for air. "Annie," he called. No answer. Only the wind. Only the fire crawling through creek grass with a soft, terrible hiss. He thought of Mary then, not as she had been at the end, thin and tired beneath the quilt, but as she had been when Nathan was small and a storm knocked the barn door loose. She had walked straight into the rain with a hammer in her hand, hair undone, jaw set like iron. "A house is not kept by fear," she had told him that night. "It is kept by the ones who step out into it." Elias stepped deeper into the smoke. A small cough reached him. He turned so fast pain shot through his hip. "Annie. Grandpa." Her voice came from low to the ground. He dropped to his knees and saw her under the broken fence rail, curled beside a flat stone with Mary's blue coffee tin hugged to her chest. Her face was streaked black with soot. Tears had made clean tracks down both cheeks. Elias crawled to her and gathered her clothes. For one breath, she was safe in his arms, and the whole burning world seemed to hold still. "I thought I saw you," she sobbed. "I thought you were calling me. I am here now. I lost the road. I know, little dove, I know." He looked behind him. The smoke had thickened. The way back to the wagon had disappeared. Ahead, the old line shack stood like a dim shape through gray air. Behind it, flame moved in the grass. Elias lifted Annie, but his leg buckled. He caught himself on a fence post and nearly fell with her. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, though fear shook her whole body. He took the blue tin and tucked it under his arm. Then he wrapped his hand around hers. "Stay low, hold tight. Do not let go unless I tell you." "I won't." They moved toward the line shack, bent near the ground where the air was less bitter. Every few steps, Elias stopped to listen. Fire had a voice when it was close. It whispered first, then snapped, then roared. This fire was still whispering in the grass, but the trees beyond it were beginning to crack. They reached the patch of rock beside the shack, just as a gust of wind pushed flame across the ditch behind them. Annie screamed. Elias pulled her against the shack wall and looked around. The door hung crooked. The roof was old cedar, dry as paper. It would not last if sparks found it. But inside, if memory served, there was a water barrel. He kicked the door open. The shack smelled of mice, dust, and old smoke. A narrow cot leaned against one wall. The rusted stove sat cold in the corner, and there, beside a shelf of cracked jars, stood the barrel. Half full. "Thank the Lord," Elias breathed. He tore a blanket from the cot and pushed it into the water. Annie helped with trembling hands. Together they dragged the heavy, wet cloth outside and slapped it over the lowest part of the roof where sparks were landing. Then Elias saw something that made his heart sink. A line of fire had crossed the road. They were cut off from Nathan and Clara. Annie saw it too, her fingers dug into his sleeve. "Grandpa, how do we get back?" Elias looked toward the Boone place. Through smoke and flame, he could not see the house or the wall, but he knew the land. He knew the low stone ridge behind the shack. It ran north for a quarter mile, then met the unfinished far end of his wall. The old wall. The part everyone had mocked. The part he had built when grief gave him no other way to live. "We follow stone," he said. Annie looked up at him, confused and afraid. "The grass burns, the brush burns. Stone does not. We stay on the rock ridge until we reach the wall." A burning branch fell near the door, scattering sparks. Elias stomped them out, then took Annie's hand again. If you believe one quiet act of preparation can save more than one life, remember this moment, because Elias Boone was about to learn that his wall had not only been built for his own house. They climbed onto the rock ridge and began moving north. The stones were uneven, slick with ash and hot in places. Elias went first, testing every step before Annie followed. Twice she stumbled, twice he caught her. Behind them, the old shack roof began to smoke. Ahead, through the gray, a dark shape slowly appeared. The wall. But as they reached it, Elias saw flames already licking through a narrow break where he had never set the final stones. And on the other side of that break stood Nathan, trapped and limping, trying to reach them with both arms outstretched. Nathan stood beyond the break with smoke rolling around his legs and pain written across his face. His left pant leg was torn where the wagon had pinned him. Blood darkened the cloth at his knee, but he kept standing, one hand braced against the unfinished stones, the other reaching toward Annie as if love alone could close the distance. "Annie," he shouted. She cried out and tried to run to him. Elias caught her by the shoulder. "No." "But Papa's there. And fire is between." The narrow break in the wall had become a mouth of flame. Dry grass, caught by the changed wind, burned low and quick through the gap. It was not a towering blaze, not yet, but it was hot enough to stop them and hungry enough to grow. Sparks jumped from one side to the other like fiery insects. Nathan limped closer, but Elias lifted one hand. "Stay back." Nathan stopped, breathing hard. Behind him, Calder and Clara appeared through the smoke. Calder had one arm around Clara's shoulders, helping her walk. Her hair had come loose and her face was streaked with soot, but when she saw Annie, she broke away and stumbled forward. "My baby." Annie sobbed, "Mama." Elias looked down at the gap, then along the ridge. There was no safe way around. The grass on both sides was already catching. The rock beneath their boots protected them for the moment, but the smoke was thickening fast. If they stayed where they were, the fire would wrap around them. If they tried to jump, Annie might fall. He looked at the stones near his feet. Some were loose. Not many, not enough for a proper wall, but maybe enough for a bridge. "Annie," he said, "get behind me." She obeyed, shaking. Elias bent for the first stone. Pain struck his back so sharply he nearly cried out. His hands, burned and scraped from the night's work, closed around the rough rock. He lifted it inch by inch, every muscle trembling, then dropped it into the burning gap. Flame curled around it. He took another. Nathan saw what he was doing. "Pa, no, you can't." "I can if you stop talking." Calder moved at once, pulling stones from his side of the wall and shoving them toward the gap with his boot. Nathan, despite his bad leg, lowered himself and pushed smaller rocks into place. Clara tore off her shawl, soaked from earlier, and threw it over a patch of burning grass near the edge. For a few desperate minutes, they all worked from opposite sides, building toward each other through smoke and heat. No one laughed at the old wall now. No one called it foolish. Stone by stone, the gap narrowed. Elias' breath came in harsh pulls. His chest felt as if an iron band had been tightened around it. Each rock seemed heavier than the last. Annie stood behind him, one hand gripping Mary's blue coffee tin, the other pressed over her mouth. "Grandpa," she whispered, "you're hurt." "Later," he said. There might not be later. The words were too old for her voice. Elias looked back at her. In the red glow, she looked so much like Mary that his heart almost failed him. Not Mary in sickness, Mary in strength. Mary with rain in her hair and a hammer in her hand. Mary keeping the house by stepping into the storm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded note. His fingers left soot on the paper. "Put this in the tin," he told Annie. She stared at it. "What is it?" "Your grandmother's words." Annie took the note carefully and placed it inside the blue tin. She closed the lid with both hands, as if shutting away a prayer. At last, the stones in the gap rose high enough to break the little flame's path. Smoke still poured over them, but the fire bent away, searching for easier food. Elias tested the new stones with his boot. Unsteady but passable. "Nathan," he called, "take her when I send her." Nathan nodded, tears cutting through the ash on his face. Elias knelt beside Annie. "You step where I step. Do not look at the fire, look at your father." "I'm scared." "So am I." Her eyes widened. Adults rarely told children the truth so plainly. Elias touched her cheek with his burned hand, gentle despite the pain. "Being scared means you know the danger is real. Moving anyway means you know love is real too." Then he stood and crossed first. The stones shifted under his weight. Heat rose from below, burning through his soles. For one awful second, his balance faltered. Nathan lunged forward, but Elias caught himself on the wall and kept moving. When he reached the other side, Nathan grabbed his arm. "Pa, not yet." Elias turned back and held out both hands. Annie stepped onto the first stone. Smoke swallowed her knees. She froze. "Look at me," Nathan called. "Just me." Clara held both hands to her mouth, silent and shaking. Annie took another step. Then another. A gust of wind pushed fire against the stones. Flame flashed up beside her dress. She cried out and stumbled. Elias and Nathan both reached, but neither was close enough. Calder moved faster. He threw himself across the stones from the far side and caught Annie around the waist. The two of them fell hard against the wall, but he rolled, shielding her with his body as sparks scattered over his coat. Elias dragged Annie clear. Nathan pulled Calder by the collar. Clara fell to her knees and wrapped her daughter in both arms. For a moment, they were all together in the smoke. Then the wind roared again. The fire beyond the wall surged, not at the house now, but down the side path toward the barn and yard where Sheriff Harlan waited with the Bennett children. Elias turned, horror rising in him. "They're still back there," he said. Calder pushed himself up, coughing. His sleeve smoked where sparks had landed. The children. Nathan tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Elias looked at his son's injured leg, at Clara holding Annie, at Calder's burned sleeve, and then toward the dark line of his wall leading back to the ranch. He knew the path. He also knew his body had very little left. Nathan grabbed his wrist. "Pa, don't." Elias looked at his son, and something long broken between them finally rested. "I spent years building a wall to save what I loved," he said. "Now I have to see who else it can carry." He pulled free, took Calder's shovel from the dirt, and started back along the glowing stones toward the children and the burning yard. Elias followed the wall by touch more than sight. The stones were warm beneath his palm, some hot enough to sting, but he did not pull away. Smoke hid the yard, the barn, the house, and the path behind him. Every few steps, flame flashed beyond the wall, bright and wild, then bent aside when it found nothing easy to claim. He moved slowly because slow was all he had left. His lungs burned, his bad leg dragged. The shovel felt heavier than any stone he had carried in all those years. But the wall was under his hand, guiding him home the way a rope guides a man through dark water. Behind him, Nathan shouted, but the wind tore the words apart. Elias did not turn. Near the barn, he heard Sheriff Harlan calling to the Bennett children. Rose answered first, then Luke, then little Matthew with a weak cry that made Elias grip the shovel tighter. The yard appeared in pieces. The pump, the porch, the barn roof smoking again. Sheriff Harlan stood near the cellar steps with one arm around Matthew and the other pushing Rose and Luke ahead of him. His burned sleeve hung loose. His face looked gray beneath the soot. "The south path is closed," Harlan shouted when he saw Elias. "I was waiting for the smoke to lift." "It won't lift soon enough," Elias called back. A burst of sparks swept across the yard. A patch of grass flared near the chicken coop. Elias struck it down with the shovel, then pointed toward the stone wall. "Follow the wall north to the rock ridge. It meets the creek bend. Nathan is there." Harlan looked at the children, then at Elias. "Can they make it?" "They have to." Rose stepped forward, holding Matthew's hand. "We can." Elias looked at her, this soot-faced girl who had kept her brothers breathing in the dark. He saw then that courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was a child standing straight while the world burned around her. He nodded. "Stay close to the stones. If you lose sight, keep one hand on them." Luke looked up at Elias. "Are you coming?" Elias almost said yes. Then he saw the barn door. A coal had landed in the hay scattered beneath it. A small flame was crawling inward, quiet and low. If it reached the loft, the blast of heat would roll across the yard and swallow the path before the children made it 20 steps. Harlan saw it too. "I'll handle it," the sheriff said. "No," Elias said. "You get them out. You can barely stand." Elias smiled faintly. Been hearing that for years. Harlan hesitated only a moment, then gathered the children. Rose took Matthew. Luke took Rose's skirt. Together they moved toward the wall, crouched low under the smoke. Matthew stopped after a few steps and looked back. His small fist opened. The peppermint lay in his palm, blackened at the edge but still wrapped. "I earned it," he called. Elias' heart twisted. "You surely did," he said. Then the children vanished into the smoke with the sheriff behind them. Elias turned to the barn. He moved as fast as an old man could move at the end of his strength. The flame had reached the first line of hay. He beat it down with the shovel once, twice, again and again, until the handle slipped in his burned hands. Pain shot through him, but the flame shrank. He kicked dirt over the last glowing place, then dragged the wet blanket from the door and smothered the rest. When it was done, he leaned against the barn frame and looked toward the house. Mary's lilac bush was smoking near the porch. He stumbled to it, scooped dirt with both hands, and packed it around the roots. It was a foolish thing to save in such a night. A bush did not matter like a child. It did not matter like a son. But Mary had planted it with hope in her fingers. So Elias saved it. By the time he reached the wall again, the yard was empty. The worst of the fire had split around the ranch, running along the ridge and wash, leaving the house standing inside a ring of smoke and ash. The wall had not conquered the fire. Nothing conquered fire, but it had changed its road long enough for people to live. Elias took 3 more steps, then sank to his knees beside the stones. The world grew quiet in a strange way. He felt a hand on his shoulder and thought, for one soft moment, that Mary had come for him. But it was Nathan. His son dropped beside him, injured legs stretched out, tears cutting clean lines through his dirty face. "I told you not to come back," Elias whispered. Nathan laughed once, broken and full of relief. "You never listened to me either." Clara stood behind him with Annie in her arms. Calder was there too, helping Sheriff Harlan lead the Bennett children from the smoke. Rose was coughing but upright. Luke clung to Calder's coat. Matthew held his peppermint like a medal. They had made it. All of them. Elias bowed his head, and for the first time since Mary's death, he did not feel alone in the silence. At dawn, the fire moved on. The valley was blackened, fences were gone, timber smoked on the slopes. Some homes had been lost, and grief would walk Mercy Flats for a long while, but the Boone house stood. The barn stood. The lilac bush by the porch, scorched at the tips, still held to the earth. 3 days later, Annie opened Mary's blue tin at the kitchen table. Inside was the note Elias had given her. Beneath it, tucked under the old fence wire, was another folded paper no one had seen before. Elias knew Mary's hand at once. Nathan read it aloud because Elias' eyes blurred too quickly. "If Elias ever starts building against the ridge, do not laugh at him. He hears danger before most folks do. But make sure he knows this. A wall built by one man may save a house. A wall finished by many may save a whole valley." No one spoke for a long time. Then Calder Pike took off his hat. "I'll bring my sons tomorrow," he said. "We'll start on my side." Sheriff Harlan nodded. "Town will help." Nathan looked at his father. "So will I." Elias studied his son's hands, scraped raw from stone and smoke, and saw they were not city hands or ranch hands anymore. They were simply the hands of a man who had come home when it mattered. In the months that followed, the people of Mercy Flats built walls, cleared brush, dug bear strips, and learned what Elias had tried to tell them in silence. No one called him strange again, not to his face and not behind his back if Annie Boone was near enough to hear. Years later, when the wall stood longer and stronger than Elias ever could, Annie would bring her own children to Cottonwood Ridge. She would place their small palms on the stones and tell them that love was not always soft. Sometimes love was heavy. Sometimes it cut your hands. Sometimes it looked like an old man working alone while everyone else laughed. And if this story stayed with you, hold on to its quiet truth and subscribe for more frontier tales where love, courage, and healing rise from the dust. Elias Boone lived long enough to see the valley bloom green again. One spring morning, he sat on the porch beside Nathan while Annie tied a blue ribbon around Mary's lilac bush. The wind moved gently over the ridge. Juniper grazed near the fence. The wall stretched along the land, rough and steady beneath the sun. Elias looked at it and finally understood. He had not built a wall against death. He had built a path back to the living. And on Cottonwood Ridge, where smoke had once covered the stars, the stones still stood, holding the memory of every hand that chose to love before the fire arrived.